good afternoon and welcome to our panel discussion on gender equality in PR, protecting our mental well-being, brought to you by the PRCA APAC ED&I committee. My name is Natashia. I'm a partner at Brewer, and I will be moderating today's discussion. And joining me today are our panelists. So we have Bernice Lim here. Bernice will wave.
Hi.
She's a director and principal psychologist at Asia Psychology Center. And then we have Charu Srivastava, Chief Strategy Officer at TriOn Co.
Hello.
And last but not least, we have Nugent, Regional Director APAC at Archetype. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Today, our industry faces undeniable gender bias and stereotypes, from the common misconception that PR is predominantly a female industry, for example, something that we've all heard of. And there's also the common stereotypes that male consultants are tough and decisive, while females are supposed to be more risk averse. And these are just some of the gender categorizations that we confront on a daily basis. And these stereotypes not only undermine the diversity of our profession, but also serve as the backdrop of discrimination and other challenges that we will hopefully discuss today. So before we start, I know we are in the webinar format. We want to make sure that this session is as interactive as possible. Please do feel free to drop your questions in the chat box. Feel free to do so anonymously if you prefer, and we will address them throughout the discussion. All right, so I think with that, let's kick off with the first question. To start off, I think it'll be good if we can align a little bit on what gender equality actually means. So I'll start with the ladies first. I think this is a question, maybe Charu, if you want to kick off first, what does gender equality mean to you personally?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic start for this conversation. I think what's for me, gender equality is truly having equal opportunities, equal, I wouldn't say rights. I think opportunities is the main thing, because rights are going down to more, it's a different conversation. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. But I think it's the opportunities part where you're looking at things without a gender bias. So when you look at things, you look at through an equal lens, whether the person is a male or female, or other genders that they identify as. There should be no sense of that encroaching into your decision in any aspect of merit, of capabilities, of offering them opportunities. So for me, gender bias is something that should kind of equal the playing field, right? In a sense, everybody has an equal playing field, level playing field, and you have a chance to prove yourself based on your abilities and what you bring to the table, instead of your gender playing a part in that being determined at the workplace. And I would at one day hope in life, but for today, let's stick to the workplace. So yeah, for me, that's what I would say is gender equality, where we are blind to the gender of the person that we're talking to and interacting with in a workplace.
Yeah, so equal playing field for all, right, regardless of their gender.
Yeah.
And then Bernice, how about from your end? How do you what does gender equality mean to you?
Okay, so Charu talked about equity, right? Having equal opportunity, whether regardless of gender, regardless of orientation, etc. For me, I think it's also about being or feeling safe in the environment, and feeling equally safe to speak up, feeling equally safe to sound out, hey, this is not correct, or hey boss, I don't think that was accurate to say. I think feeling equally safe is a very big part of gender equality for me. So psychological safety, essentially.
Yeah, psychological safety. Yeah, I think that's something we'll also talk a little bit about more, right? How does it impact your mental well-being? So being in a safe work environment definitely has good impact, whereas in an environment where it's toxic or there's discrimination, that kind of impact your mentally as well.
Because it's pervasive.
Correct, yes. And then Lee, what does gender equality mean to you?
Well, it's hard to add much more than Bernice and Charu have said already, really. I think the important word that was used before was equity. So for me, it's equity of opportunity. So it's undeniable right now that we don't have equity of opportunity across genders, as Charu was saying, in all walks of life, never mind just in our professional spheres. So I think our outlook within the industry really is about trying to remove barriers to ensure that there is equity of opportunity, and that, you know, nobody sees gender or feels that gender is a barrier to achieve what they can achieve through their own ability.
Yeah.
So we just add one thing. I mean, sorry, just based on what everyone's shared, I think the other thing that always comes to my mind is when you turn up as your authentic self, and that kind of extends to your gender as well. So you come up as who you are in your skin, and that is, you know, of course, your gender is a big part of your identity. So you come in as your true self to work without having to mask that aspect of yourself. So that's also for me is really important in pure, safe gender equality.
Yeah, and I think it's also about being able to be yourself, you know, regardless of your gender, right? Your gender determine your job opportunity, or how you should be hiring, for example, right?
Yeah, or your behaviors and your attitudes that shouldn't be dictated by your gender.
You need to self-censor or be a certain way in order to not rock the boat, for example. Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, when we talk about gender equality, obviously there are gender biases in our industry, and that's something that I think we all can acknowledge. I mean, for you, Charu, or for Lee, what are some of the most common challenges that you've observed, or maybe you've personally has experienced when it comes to gender bias in our industry?
You know, I would love to hear from Lee first, because I know during our session, he had some great insights, which I would love to add on to, but I would love to hear from him first.
Yeah,
you know, I think it was a great thing we had the last time when we had this conversation.
Yeah, I think some of the things I've observed, I've had a long career. I'm quite old, so I've observed over the years, and I'm sad to say that some of these behaviours that I'm just about to explain don't seem to have disappeared over time, despite all the work that we all do to try and make them disappear. But I'll give you a couple of examples. It's not uncommon in my experience, for me to have been in a meeting room where the senior male client has turned towards a male in the room from the agency side to ask a question, despite the fact that there was a woman in the room who was more senior than the male. And that still happens. And, you know, I, on more than one occasion, have had to take the client to one side after the meeting to ask why that was happening. I've also seen similar environment clients. I've seen clients turn to female members of the account team and ask them to pour the drinks. I've seen that happen. I think we've all seen, probably all been witness to some of the inherent biases that can happen during either promotion cycles or hiring cycles, where women are maybe just recently married or have indicated that they're ready to start having children or have recently had children. And there are some out there who will see that as a handicap to giving a woman the opportunity to grow, to be promoted, to move into the next sphere. That certainly happens. And I think the single biggest thing we face in our industry is the pay gap, the gender pay gap. I think that there is no excuse for, and I think not enough people in our industry are aware that it even exists, because they don't even monitor what's happening within their own organizations. So there's lots of things that happen all the time still that we need to be better at working through.
Yeah, and so that's exactly why I wanted Lee to go first, because not that I wanted to show if Lee has been working for long, but it's just to show that, you know, things have not changed, unfortunately. Almost everything that Lee shared, I've experienced personally, or I have witnessed it happening to people around me, my peers, my juniors. And I think for me, that's, you know, obviously a very huge sign that the problem isn't going away anytime soon unless we do something about it. And that's why I hope, you know, today's conversation is a platform for us to tackle some of these things in an open way. You know, personally, I've had instances in the past where literally when promotion cycle comes through and I've been told, oh, you are not getting promoted. And when I asked, oh, why? They're like, oh, you know, there's one client who doesn't like you. So out of the 100, I'm just giving an example, so 100%, 1% doesn't like me, but 99% likes me. But I'm being held against for that 1%. And when I dig in further, it's the one client who I'm actually managing a little stricter because they're trying to take advantage of my team. And I'm actually trying to be more decisive and more kind of assertive in the boundaries that we have in terms of a workplace agreement, a legal agreement. So for me, it just goes back to that question of, okay, so if I am being assertive and kind of actually holding my ground in a professional manner, I'm being penalized for that in terms of, oh, the client doesn't like you, doesn't like your attitude, or doesn't like your personality, but it's actually a professional conduct that they're making a judgment against. And I was, of course, extremely upset by this because that was literally my job as, the head of the team. I was tasked to make sure that I was managing clients and kind of managing the numbers of it. And that goes down to then being taken for granted in terms of deliverables. So it's a very big, for me, it was a very big thing about, okay, you want me to do my job, but you want me to do my job by bending over backwards just because, like, that doesn't seem fair. And other things, I mean, you walk into the room, as Lee said, I've worked with a lot of finance clients, and tech clients, and there have been instances where I walked in with my colleagues and been totally disregarded, even though I am the senior most person in the room. And I mean, things just, sometimes it's so often that it happens that you actually miss the signs as well because you're so used to it in a way. And I said that with a really, with a very sad kind of look at the industry because we are so used to and almost conditioned to these microaggressions that those we overlook. The bigger ones stay with us, but the ones that we overlook, they happen so often that they add up. And many times they subconsciously creep into our own conscience and our own way of working as well. And there's so much to tackle that it just becomes like, okay, where do we start? So I think for me, like that's the thing that I've noticed for a long time. And I think that's a challenge. And of course, it kind of comes in many ways. I've seen peers who are female who themselves are going into interviews and saying, oh, so are you going to get married? And I'm like, but you're a woman. Why are you doing this? So for me, it goes back to, funnily enough, there's no discrimination when it comes to discrimination. There's, people are, anybody is capable of doing that. And that's just wrong. We need to change that.
Yeah, and I also just a point here, it's definitely not something that is just happening in our industry, although, we are talking about, this is a PRCA event and it's a PR professionals here, but gender inequality biases happen also across in other industries as well. And I was wondering if we could maybe hear from you, Bernice, in terms of, do you see gender stereotype also exists in other industry, maybe in your industry or in some of the industry that you're familiar with?
No, of course, right. So I think that these are like discrimination, inequity, it's all universal concerns that I think across different companies, across different industries. And it's not just about gender, like gender discrimination. This transcends gender equality. Any form of pigeonholing of anybody. When we stereotype, when we give into our biases, that's pigeonholing. So any form of pigeonholing of anyone can make them feel like they're not themselves, or lead them to second guess themselves. I think a point that Charu mentioned just now, it's about not being your authentic self, right? So when we feel like it's not safe for us to be ourselves, like we need to fit into a certain mold, or if not, we're going to be penalized. You can see how that lack of authenticity, the fact that you need to put up a facade all the time, it can definitely affect your well-being, because it's going to drive up anxiety. It's going to drive up, do I deserve to be here? Maybe I'm not cut out to do this as I thought. So I kind of know I'm doing well. I love this, but at the same time, I don't seem to be fitting into a certain mold. So maybe I'm not as cut out to do this as I initially thought. So this creates like a huge dissonance in you. Do I deserve to be here? Do I not deserve to be here? Why do I have conflicting data? So this, you can see how that would be very distressing for many.
Yeah, and kind of bridge back to what we want to talk about also, right? Like we understand that there are stereotyping happening, there's discrimination happening. These are real issues that not only, it's not just an issue, it's a serious issue that can impact your career, right? But at the same time, it also impacts your mental well-being as a professional, regardless of your gender, right? So maybe just to elaborate further, Bernice, how does stereotyping affect the mental well-being of professionals? In what way does it lead to other mental health challenges, for example?
Okay, so I mentioned that when you don't feel like you can be authentic, there's this self-second guessing, and this can definitely drive you to feeling anxious all the time, because these would be you start to second guess yourself in the thousands of different decisions that you make. And when you you second guess yourself like that, you're going to gradually erode your self-confidence. You're going to start feeling very low about yourself. Career growth and accomplishments, it tends to form a very large part of identity for many of us, right? And many of us need to feel fulfilled and competent in our work in order to feel good about ourselves. So when there's so much second guessing going along, we're going to wonder, am I cut out for this? And we're going to feel destabilized in a very large part of our identity. And I think that there are many individuals, because there's so many individuals that are driven by their needs to achieve, and very often in societal convention, career advancement, career achievement is a very large part of success, right? So conventionally. So, if I don't feel like I'm compensated enough, like for example, for given equal opportunity, pay raises, etc. So these individuals might then find this need to overcompensate for this lack of achievement. So some thoughts would be like, oh, you know what, I think it's just about me working harder. I'm going to be even more present to my clients. I'll say yes to even more demands. And this is a word that everybody is already familiar with. This is going to drive burnout, right? And this is a vicious cycle because the system is unfair, but I may or may not be able to see that it's actually the system and not me, right? So since I'm rewarded differently, I'm going to overcompensate by working harder. And because I'm desperate to have the validation that I need, I'm going to just consistently burn myself out, picking up the slack that maybe other people might have left, just to be more visible, just to shine a little brighter, just to receive the acknowledgement that I actually rightly deserve.
Yeah. And I'm nodding here because I feel like you're talking to me. I don't know about Charu or Lee.
Same, I think we same here, exactly the same.
Yeah. So burnout, like, it's a very, very strong link between burnout and not being compensated in an equal way, to be honest, because we're all driven to receive acknowledgement, right? External validation, as much as internal validation's really important, like knowing your worth, etc.
Yeah.
But I think that all of us require external validation also, because we do require feedback to tell us whether we're doing okay or not. And when there's an absence of that, obviously self-doubt is going to breed.
I think, just to interject on that, I mean, the workplace is designed in a way where it is very much validation focused, because how you get paid, in a sense, your promotions and opportunities, those are a sense of validation that is kind of built into the system, right? It is a reward system. So I guess, like what you said, Bernice, really rings very true, because we are all working towards that. And when we don't get it, we're just working harder and harder. So yeah, no, totally, yeah, Natasha, it resonates with me 200%, and I'm sure a lot of people on the webinar will have the same feelings. And I guess a reminder, if you have questions, please do drop them in the chat box as well.
Yeah, and I think, as Bernice reminded us the other day, it's often the brightest stars that burn out soonest.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I think that shows you again the really committed people, the people who really want to drive themselves to betterment and to greater heights. If barriers are being put in the way for that achievement, then they're the people who are going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and burn out eventually. Yeah.
So we need to incentivize. Using the right factors, right? So I think this is something that maybe we are not always mindful of. And I do think that as individuals, when we feel like we are burning out also, we also need to sit back and reflect, hey, is the system actually failing me at this point of time? Or do I really need to step up?
Yeah. Fair warnings, I would say.
Yeah, and there's also this feeling of, like, personally, like as a full-time working mom, like I know when I take leave, for example, I'm very cautious, and I feel like I have to work twice as harder because I take a lot of leave when my kids are sick, or when I have to take the report card, for example. So I always feel like I have to work even harder, right? to reach this expectation of me as a full-time consultant, for example. And you know, and I think that comes with gender also, right? You know, being woman working full-time, there's always this expectation, oh, she's gonna take more leave, or she's gonna take some time off. And sometimes these are expectation that we're aware of, that we're trying to fight, right, by working even harder, and you know, by making sure that we give back even more time than the time that we take off. So I think there's a lot of challenge there when it comes to gender, right, and inequality in our industry. Yeah.
I think
feel like for me,
I was going to say, I think there's a huge amount of, sorry, Charu, do you want to go ahead? See, there's me, stereotypes, talking over. Did you see that?
No.
Tech issue, guys. That's a tech thing. This is a tech thing.
Well, what I was going to say was, I think there's also a huge amount of responsibility on us as leaders to actually play the long game here, right? Which is, if we are starting to see a huge proportion of our workforce, working mums, as people who, you know, we're going to watch more closely when they take holiday. We're not going to trust as much. We're not going to move their careers forward with the kind of promotions that they deserve. One, there's the moral imperative about how wrong that is. But two, it's incredibly short-sighted for your business. Think about, if you want to go right back to brass tacks, think about the investment, the training, the coaching that's gone into that talent, gone into that person to make them as good as they are. To then decide you're going to cut that away from your own organization is ludicrously short-sighted. Because if you want to hire somebody else in to do that, you've got the risk of a new person, you've got the cost of the hiring, you've got the cost of the recruitment, all of those. Why don't we all work harder to retain working mums who can actually bring so much value and you've already invested in? It's kind of just I've always considered it as a crazy idea that we can't be better at this kind of stuff.
We just need to clone Lee and make sure that he's everywhere in the industry as the voice of reason for everyone. But I 100% agree. I mean, like, and I think we're discussing this the other day, right? Like, gender equality is great. It's not just a woke, fashionable word. It actually makes business sense. And for those people who don't get the, like Lee said, the moral, argument for it, then think of the business argument for it, right? Like, why I be still blind or just not willing to open ourselves to that, right? And to my earlier point that I was trying to make as well was, you know, what Natasha said, I just wanted to talk about it, that there's already a self-bias, right? Where you went, oh, but I'm a working mother, so if I take leave, I'm going to take leave. But because that's what we've been conditioned. And I'm sure you didn't join the industry as a working mother, right? You build up your career, but because that's what we notice around us, the behavior we see being perpetuated, when it comes to us, then we believe that's going to happen to us as well. I've been in that space myself where I'm like, okay, I need to behave in this certain manner because I have noticed that's what's the norm, right? And as I go, as I kind of progress through my career, that's how I have to behave in a way that gets me noticed, validations with my promotions, with my pay raises, and otherwise I'm actually not doing my job. I think it's also a bit of the definition of what exactly is doing a good job, whether regardless of your gender. And it's interesting, and I used to tell my teams before, I'm like, oh, you know, our time is not our time, it's distributed by the client. And I used to be like, you know, remember this, guys. Now I'm like, throw that away. I'm sorry I ever said that. And I admitted myself, I'm like, I'm sorry I ever said that, because our time is obviously our time. Yes, we are in the service industry, but it doesn't mean that our time is totally out of our control. We have to have some levels of boundaries and ways of working. And that kind of extends to other things that we have grown up with professionally that we think is the norm. And then we ourselves end up perpetuating it. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's something that has been so ingrained in us that it takes even ourselves to acknowledge that sometimes we are also adding to the situation, even though we think we might not be, but many times it's self-sabotage.
I just wanted to add into your point, Charu, about presentism. Like, we overcompensate by actually putting in more hours, right? But we shouldn't conflate the quality of hours with the quantity of hours. And okay, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that some industries require a lot more presentism than others, especially if you're directly client-facing and if the client might be, you know, they have a huge campaign and there's a lot of firefighting and the client happens to be anxious. I think there's a lot of demand of being present, responding like as quickly as possible. I think that also exacerbates this idea that, okay, because I took one day off work, I better overcompensate by putting in the number of hours that I should have been present yesterday because the rest of my team were present. So I think as people managers, we need to be cautious, mindful about the subconscious factors we're using to evaluate ourselves, evaluate our team members, because presenteeism isn't actually a good thing anymore. Even it's not hip anymore to say, oh, I respond quickly all the time, I don't actually sleep. That's actually not a nice thing to say. That's not a great thing to say anymore. You're not really a good model anymore.
Yes,
just want to add to that.
No, 100% agree to that. And just to clarify, my new motto is work smart, not work hard. So if you can do your work efficiently on time with good quality, go for it. I don't need you to be around for the full work day to dragging on one task that could have been completed way quicker, and we could have, wrapped up the day much faster. So it was just like my personal experience. Like I said, I have been through that. So I've seen now, and I've had burnout. I've spoken about it pretty openly as well. And I feel like those things for me were the wake up calls to kind of question my own subconscious biases that I had towards myself, right? The self-sabotage that I talked about, I've been guilty of that. So it's more like it's a wake up call to your own areas of improvement and your own gaps. And as I think we talked about it, and I might be stepping into the next question that Natasha to ask us, but as leaders, we need to be able to break that cycle. If not, it never ends.
Yeah, and I think before we jump into that, I kind of want to drive our conversations back on, the mental challenges associated with gender bias, right? I think we all agree that, there's a lot of false expectation, categorization, which might impact you individually as professional or even as leaders, right? So how can we as individuals then cope with this or overcome these mental health challenges if we know someone or we ourselves are struggling with it? So maybe that's a question for Bernice, if you have kind of strategies that we can use or refer to in such situation.
Right. Okay. So this is easier said than done, but okay, these are the same things that I worked together with my clients, my patients in sessions when they do come to me with burnout issues, or when they feel like the environment isn't necessarily very self-affirming, the work environment, I mean. So we probably need to work on what is called our core identity. So this is essentially this like a set of beliefs, self-beliefs that we have of ourselves that we hold true regardless of the influence of the external environment. So even though I'm not well compensated, even though I'm not fairly compensated, even though I know that I'm being passed over for opportunities that I deserve, I know it's not me. I know it's a systemic flaw. So holding true to what you know of yourself, despite whatever people say to you, despite whatever people don't say to you. So I do think that when we feel a little bit more stable like this, like it's also a big part of identity doesn't really wobble, despite maybe being criticized or not getting the acknowledgement that we should have gotten. I think that helps us feel less anxious. We tend to feel a lot less self-doubt about where we are, whether we're still doing well or not, right? And it's not just about having this set of core beliefs about yourself. It's also about having a set of philosophies that you want to hold true and adopt for life, right? So these could be philosophies like I will work hard and take pride in my work, regardless of compensation. I'm going to do this to the best of my ability anyways, even though I may not be well compensated for it. So of course, this might veer dangerously into being easily exploited, but it's more like, it doesn't matter whether the system is fair to me or not. I feel good doing my best, so I'm going to continue doing good no matter what. And this is especially true when you feel you have very high needs of achievement. I don't care, if the system rewards me or not. I take pride in doing a good job well done, and maybe even if I don't get like acknowledged by my team or my boss. I know the client appreciates me doing this, so I'm just going to do this anyway. So regardless of systemic flaws, some things we hold that we can use to hold as anchors. We just anchoring us to certain beliefs, certain set of philosophies. I think that can help us feel more at ease also, and more sure of ourselves, especially when we feel like we're under attack by the system, right? I think that's one of the things that we can do. And Charu mentioned something about, like, Charu already mentioned about boundaries as well. So I think that being able to stand your ground, to feel like you can defend yourself, can also serve to empower you to feel less helpless. So that can also be another strategy we use. Of course, boundary setting, being assertive, being vocal, being okay with contention, that can be difficult depending on the circumstance, especially if there's a huge power differential between you and your bosses, and you worry about job security. Of course, that might not be a luxury all of us can afford, but it's still the idea, being able to set a certain boundary, and even more importantly, assert that boundary when necessary. So for example, setting a boundary is communicating that you're not going to respond to any more emails after 8. Asserting that boundaries is going ahead to not answer any emails after 8. So communication and assertion of the boundaries are actually two different things. We need to both communicate as well as assert the boundaries in order for the boundaries to be effective. So boundary setting and also having anchors, these are two core strategies that we can use to feel better about ourselves in a system that might be flawed.
Yeah. And I think one thing that has worked for me also is to have mentors, trusted mentors who you can share your challenge or struggle. He or she may not be able to, change the system immediately, but having someone who can hear you out and at least make sense of your challenges and acknowledge it and say, like, look, here's maybe what you can do. It's more like having a friend who you trust and who you can share your struggle with, and having a friend who can listen to you. I think that has helped. And then someone who you can learn also, because it could be someone that may have encountered the same problems or challenges that you have, and be able to listen for their advice. I think that's something that has worked for me personally as well. Yeah.
So you don't feel as alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, absolutely.
I was actually totally agree with that. I think once I had this remark that was made to me by a male manager who said, don't be friends with your team. And I was really taken aback by that, because I'm like, why not? Because I know where to draw the boundaries. I'm not going to not perform in my capacity as the manager if just because they're my friends. In fact, I think it's the other way around, because I've worked for a long time in the industry as well. And some of my closest friends today are people who I've met at work. And we might not be working together now. Well, in fact, it's interesting enough, some of my closest friends, we have met at work, we have gone our separate ways professionally, met again, gone into separate ways. So we've repeated ourselves in various capacities of working as peers, becoming managers of each other, then kind of going on to work as client and as agency. So different variations and dynamics of that relation. For me, that just shows you can be friends at work. In fact, I think I highly recommend it for myself, because it's been amazing having a group of friends who understand the dynamics. Because while it's not, it's common, but there's still some nuances that are quite specific to the industry that we are in. So having people who understand that actually makes a big difference, because my best friend who might not be in the industry, while she wants to be there for me, might not get the full extent of why I'm upset about certain things, or why I'm, feeling not validated, for example. But people from the same industry who are friends, who understand that they can be there, and sometimes just from a listening ear with a little bit more intention, because they get it, or what we're saying sometimes can sound total French to people who are not in the industry. So for me, that also helps. Having a really good support system of people from the industry is so important. And I'm lucky that I have a very close, good friends who are from the industry that I've met in my 10 years in Singapore, that I have really got this safe relationship of honesty and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, and I would add as well, and this is probably something that's easier said than done. When I speak at events, I often talk about this concept of if you can hire your boss, and by that I mean when you have choices about where you go and work, think long and hard about who it is you're going to work for, not just the organization, not just your salary, not just the job title, but think about the individual that you're going to work for and what they can do for you as you grow and develop your career. And I think there's an element of that, as Bernice says, it's to develop your, find your anchors, identify your boundaries. But if it's possible and you're still in an organization that you don't feel, despite the anchors and the boundaries being there, that you don't feel that you're being appreciated, then keep your eyes open for one where you will be more appreciated, and focus on who it is you're going to work for. I know it's not easy, particularly in the current environment, to pick and choose jobs, but people keeping their eyes open for what's going to work for them is going to be really helpful for your own mental well-being.
Can I just borrow your point, Lee, and just add on to it? I do think it's really important for us to, be on the lookout, especially when we start realizing, okay, the system isn't quite fair for me. I think having that light at the end of the tunnel, knowing that, hey, I have other opportunities elsewhere, this doesn't have to be the be all end all, I don't have to suffer here indefinitely, that can definitely help with mental well-being. So I can't agree more. So when you start feeling disenchanted, disillusioned, you're starting to feel a lot of resentment towards the establishment, I completely agree. We need to start looking elsewhere. If nothing to actually help you continue chugging forward, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I just need to get there and find another opportunity to jump out, because it's not me, it's the system. I can't agree more.
I think as leaders, we all play a role, right, in ensuring gender equality and ensuring that we create a positive work environment. I think I want to hear maybe from you, Lee. What are your thoughts in terms of how can leaders advocate for gender equality while also ensuring you're protecting your own well-being as well as your team's well-being? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that we often have is identifying the problems that exist, and actually that's a really important step in terms of developing improvement strategies inside an organization. So you have to know where you are today. If there's a gender pay gap, you need to know what that gender pay gap is. If there are issues where it looks like though the majority of the workforce is female, for example, and yet the majority of the senior management is male, you can generate data on that, and you can have a plan about how you're going to change those things. But I think from my perspective, things that I think have worked for me in aiding development of an organization, improving this part of an organization's infrastructure, is first of all is actually becoming aware of my own unconscious biases. I didn't think I had any until I actually worked out and went on training and realized I did. And I think that was a really important step. That helped me then to be able to understand how better to listen to people who are different than me. Once I realized that, once I could listen and I could take on board what they were saying, then I could go away and create mini groups within the organization to try and address some of the systemic problems that existed. And my organization isn't perfect at all. We've made huge steps. I think I've got 12 managing directors that report into me, 8 of them are female. Every single one of them has a deputy who is female. So we're making that progress. There's more to do. And I think also it's prioritizing change at an equal level to other things that you're doing within the business. Yep, we have numbers to hit every month. Yep, we have innovations to develop. But we have to put things like this as high on the agenda. And as I said earlier, because they are business imperatives, we all know, all of us who work in PR in particular know how difficult it is to recruit at the moment, how difficult it is to recruit top talent. Anything that keeps our recruitment pool wide for really good talent is really important and positive for our business. So making sure that as a business strategy, it has the same level of priority as other areas is key from my point of view.
Yeah. Charu, is there anything you want to add for this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with what Lee is saying. And I think from my perspective, just to share from a smaller company perspective as well, and a personal sharing too. So for us, one of the biggest things when, we were setting up the company was to come, and it goes back to what actually Bernice as well said, having a very core set of principles and values that guide everything that we do. And it's a good reminder for us when we are faced with things that we might need to make a decision and it goes against the values, that it's there up in the black and white. So I think that was really important for us to put together, and part of that also includes making sure we have zero discrimination. Of course, easier said than done, but at least having those words there is a good reminder every time that we might, even subconsciously, that thought filters through our head, that we have it at the back of our minds that, hey, remember, we need to be clear about these things. And we've also created a very strong culture handbook that actually has a very, very clear and even more detailed breakdown of what it means when we say that there's no discrimination. So it kind of is a good guiding light. But I think more than that, my personal belief is going to also what Lee said, would you hire your boss? I think that point is, I've worked with different types of bosses in my career, 14 years, right? And some are good, some are bad. Some are the ones I would never want to wish on my worst enemies. But the thing is that you learn the good and the bad from all of them. And as I have come into positions and, into job roles where I have a people manager aspect to it, I try to think of the kind of manager I would have liked if I was in the position of the people that I'm managing. I always believe that, as we get into those positions, we are faced with two choices, right? Some people choose to take on what they would have expected and hoped to get from their bosses and then give it to their juniors. The other option is that they go, you know what, I had to suffer. I had to go through this horrible experience. So I'm going to do the same because that's the way that it should be. I personally, honestly, never understand why anyone would ever choose to do the second option. But unfortunately, there are people like that. And for me, I think it's the biggest point at which you, and I say you in the sense of an individual in that position, can make a difference. Because every time you choose to do the first one, you're actually breaking that cycle. And every time you choose to do the second one, you're actually perpetuating that cycle. So if you do the first one, basically you're putting an end to that bad behavior that you faced. So hope is that the person you're then managing, they don't see that bad behavior and they don't take it to their juniors when they become managers. So for me, that's the biggest thing. And the other thing that I consciously do is if I notice such behavior happening, not directly through me or, might be indirectly, I try in whichever way I can to actually speak up about it and to bring light to the situation at hand. I think we talked about this, right? Many times there's a lot of unbiased factors that come in, I mean, unconscious bias that comes in, right? So I think it's just about pointing it out in a nicer way and just being like, hey, let's not behave in this way, or let's not speak certain words or have certain messaging and stuff. And then going to Lee's point, that also translates to the kind of work you do for your clients, right? If you have biases and discrimination in the way you look at things, if you're creating copy, you're creating creative, you're creating content assets for your clients, and if that permeates through into it, in a way your work is also affected, and that can also impact the reputation of your clients, and it just becomes a big thing. I would say, there was an conversation we did, I can't believe when it was, but as communicators, we have a big responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for the clients we work with. And if we can't be the voice of reason for them, there's no end to things ever getting fixed. So I feel like for me personally, and as a leader, that's super important that we are open to understanding where our faults are and, then putting a stop to it.
Yeah.
We don't have generation of that trauma that continues and that behavior that perpetuates.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So starting with identifying our own biases and then making a commitment as a company or leader to understand it and to do something about it, right? To address it. Those are
and to measure the progress.
Yes,
correct.
Absolutely.
And to measure the progress.
Measurable.
Because you do want to see impact in what you're doing, right, within the organization. Yeah.
And I think it has to be real intention, right? It shouldn't be like, oh, because this is what everyone's doing, so let's do it.
Yeah.
But then you'd realize it's just a piece of paper or policy that's floating around, but no one's actually implementing it. No one's actually taking it to actual conscious behavior change or mindset change. And I guess that's also where, like, I think Leo mentioned you had some training. I think that's important as well. If people do need that resource is offered to ensure that people understand what they're trying to change. Because we had this conversation about the ostrich in the sand theory. Like, you might be like, no, everything's fine, everything's great. I don't need to change until it's too late in the day. So having a great policy, then you're like, oh, it's all done, we are perfect now, everything is wonderful. But it can very often be far from the truth, to be honest.
And just to add on to your point, Charu, about it's okay, it's all good, it's all fine. So this is the same point I made during our previous conversation as well. Just to highlight how important it is to actually spot our unconscious bias, as the so concisely put, right? Stereotyping affects judgment in a very large way. Stereotyping doesn't just affect those that are receiving the stereotype. It's not just people at the receiving end of the stereotyping, especially when we're people managers. Stereotyping can affect our judgment, the way we evaluate our team member in a very, very large way. And if we're not going to evaluate them fairly, if we're not able to provide appropriate guidance and support, then we're going to end up losing very precious talent. And stereotyping, very unfortunately, tends to contribute to more and more radical beliefs, especially to those that we perceive are different or don't fit into the stereotype. So we're going to risk, so the more we are adamant against identifying or at least trying to identify our unconscious biases, the more we're going to perpetuate, again, as what you mentioned, perpetuate certain systemic flaws that are actually driving away very precious talent. And not just, you don't just end up losing talent, right? It's going to be harder and harder then to also to attract talent into the industry. So for example, the PR industry is known to be extremely harsh, against this demographic or that demographic. Is very difficult to be promoted unless you're already a part of the in group. Then you're not going to be able to attract talent anyway. Then the industry is going to very slowly fizzle out, or maybe very quickly fizzle out.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Something that we all need to be aware of. And I think that's going to bring me to my next question, which is why, as the PRCA ED&I committee, we do want to work towards a charter, right, for the communication industry across APAC that really addresses this issue, at least provide guidance on what PR professionals should do, right? So I think maybe this is a question for Charu. What is the one thing that you strongly believe should be included in this charter?
Okay, so I mean, of course, it's not a one pill to solve the problem, but I think that acknowledgement of the issue and then kind of a commitment towards having a good sense of where we are, and each agency could have that sense of where they are. To Lee's point, doing a measure of where things are, where do you stand, and just having a very clear commitment to having a very equal ground for anyone, regardless of gender, is of course a great starting point. And if we can pledge towards that, and not just an empty pledge, but a pledge with a clear set of implementations. And I mean, we are very far from having a standard of measure that is across the industry at this point. As we discussed already, there's like lots of there's a huge gap in data that exists for the industry, and especially in Asia Pacific. So it's still things that we have to talk about in more general terms, but I think having a commitment, at least to undertake some sort of an audit, to look at where we are, and then of course having a clear open mind to making changes with the guiding light of having zero discrimination is a great starting point. And then as an industry, perhaps we can figure out more specific quantifiable measures in which we should be working towards.
It's a starting point for a commitment, for an action to be done, right? And I think that's important. And then I think waiting to see if any questions from anyone. If not, I think to wrap up the conversation, just a question for all the panelists here. What would be the one thing that you would leave with our audience today about gender equality and mental well-being? Bernice, do you want to chime in first, maybe?
Right. Okay, this sounds so cliched, but as Charu, just to kind of borrow Charu's point, there's no one pill to this, and I do really sincerely believe it really starts with me, whether you are a people manager or whether you are, you're currently an executive. I think changing the culture of an industry requires the collective efforts of all. So even if you aren't a people manager, you see a fellow teammate being bullied in an informal conversation during lunch, you can choose to say, hey, that wasn't very nice. Or you could also choose to pull the colleague aside and say, hey man, that was not cool at all. And you can also be there to provide support to those that you feel are not being treated fairly. And as a people manager, I actually do think that because with power comes responsibility, then you can be a driver of change for policies from top down as well. And also, as a people manager, keeping an ear to the ground, to consistently check in, ask for consensus, ask for sentiments on the ground, how the teammates have been feeling. I think that can also cultivate an environment where everybody in the team, regardless of levels, can feel safer to speak up. We can't intervene on things that we don't know about. So I think the more we are close to the ground, or it seems like we are close to the ground, I think the more data, the more accurate data we're going to be able to collect.
Yeah. Lee, anything that you want to leave with our audience today about gender equality and mental well-being?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, hopefully it's been pretty obvious to anyone listening that the four of us are pretty passionate about this topic. But I would imagine also anyone who's listened today or listens to the recording later is probably already in line with the similar kind of views, because it's something that they're interested in. But there's quite a backlash happening, certainly in the West, probably emerging here as well at the minute, against ED&I, against ESG, against lots of different things happening where there are moves to say all of this is part of the woke agenda. As we've said throughout this, I think if we come across people who say that to us, then we need to stand our ground and we need to say, yeah, there's a moral imperative as far as I'm concerned for us to do this kind of stuff, but also it's really good for business. It's really good for business. There is empirical data that shows businesses that develop these kinds of strategies and successfully implement them become more efficient and more profitable and have happier staff. So that's the one thing I would say. Anyone listening, if you come across those people who accuse any of us who talk about this as being wokeists, explain that we're actually just being capitalist. And that
I love that.
And money still drives the world around. So still the bottom line. Yes.
Put that on a t-shirt. Oh my gosh, I love that, Lee. That's amazing. And that's so funny. I actually really love that, but it's so true. If you can't listen to reason, listen to the money at least.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong being woke. Being woke equals progress, right?
I absolutely agree. My personal view is
none of us. I don't think any of us here.
Woke. I agree.
Yeah, I'm just saying, use that against those who come to you with that
Yeah,
argument.
no,
Yeah.
I think that's so true, and it's very important as well, because I mean, I had this session that I did a couple of weeks ago with a university that had a master's program in comms, and I was talking about diversity essentially, and so many of them were like, oh my God, I can't be doing this, I can't be doing that because my seniors are not allowing me to do this, what can I do? And I had the same point to them that, look, if they can't listen to logic and what is happening out there from a sense of doing the right thing, then tell them it's the money part. If they don't listen to that, then maybe it's time to find something else to do. So I think we touched upon all those things early on as well, so good to know that I'm not the only one sprouting such wisdom. But yeah, I think for me it's just really also for people to remember that there's power in you. Don't forget that, and don't think you're alone. there's always somebody out there who's in a similar boat as you. So don't be afraid to speak up. And if you do feel like you can't, then there are avenues you can reach out. I think all of us here are on this journey of trying to make a change. The PRCA ED&I committee is definitely on that path. So, and we always welcome people to reach out to us, and if we can, we'll try and tackle that through our different episodes of the podcast. But if not, we'll figure out something to help you with that. So I hope more people can take comfort in the thought that there is change afoot, this maybe not as quickly as we would hope for it to be.
It's a process, right? And it's a process for individuals, for companies, for organizations, and for the industry also, right?
Yes.
So we're progressing through the process is the word. All right, I think thank you so much for sharing your thought with us, for all of our panelists today. This is also a special episode of Diversity Matters. Thank you for everyone who's listening to the conversation, to our audience. As Charu mentioned, we definitely want to hear from you. If you want to share your thoughts, or if there are any topics that you would like the PRCA ED&I committee to bring up in our next episodes of Diversity Matters, please drop us a note. You can add any one of us here on LinkedIn, or DM us, or even just comment on the conversations, and we'll be more than happy to take any of your input. Feel free to also share this conversation, to your friends, to your colleagues. I think the more that people are aware about these issues and challenges, the more that we will see change in our industry. And yeah, that's all for today.
And we will see. Yes.
Yes, that is true. And we look forward to seeing everyone at the next conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks, team. Bye-bye.
Bye.